I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor, the podcast. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this fine day?
I'm doing pretty good today. I don't know how Foxnews is doing at this time.
Shake up, shake up. Do you think they'll ever make up?
They will not. I think Mr. Tucker's on an adventure that's going to net him hundreds of millions of dollars because he's now probably going to come into our space.
Well, he did. I believe he was one of the founders of the Daily Caller, and I did not realize that he sold his interest in it in 2020. Then it was all his other ventures, Fox News, how he was doing with that. And now it looks like it seems to be that independent podcasting is the way many of these individuals go after they make a name for themselves and then leave the news organizations.
Right, and it's all speculation as to why he left. Did he leave on his own? Did Fox force him out? Did the family members that own Fox now that tend to lean more left than right get pressured from somebody within the Dominion lawsuit realm? Or did they just cut ties and say it's time to move on? Irregardless, though, because he's not the first one. You know, you had Glenn Beck leave.
So I have listened to him a bit, and he left after he saw what he claimed was the writing on the wall of him having to only toe the company line. And he foresaw a cancel culture getting as big as it is, so he made his own thing very early in this. But you had the gal who went to NBC and then now does her own independent podcast. She made a very big name for herself.
Megyn Kelly?
Yes, Megyn Kelly. So she's in that sphere. She did it a little bit later, but she had opportunity.
I actually watched her at one point in time. She actually wishes that she would have started her podcast 2 or 3 years earlier, because then the large following she had from Fox News, all of them most likely would have followed her to
migrated over.
Yes, to this medium. However, she lost some listenership, but she's a professional in this field, so she picked them right back up. Now, as for Bill O'Reilly, he's doing it as well, but I think he left under different circumstances.
He left under a big, giant cloud of haze, not for good reasons, not for okay reasons, and not for lawsuit having to do with Dominion reasons.
Correct. And I also learned today that there's no love with a lady that was involved with Dominion and Trump and the voting machine irregularities, which was Sidney Powell.
Yes, Sidney Powell.
Apparently released in some of the emails and texts from Mr. Tucker when they had to do depositions. He basically called her a liar and a big POS.
So I had friends, several different friends, who actively followed Sidney Powell. And I started looking into Sidney Powell just for my own desire to understand what she was saying and what was going on. And she would give what she claimed were pieces of information of truth, that XYZ happened with a machine, or XYZ happened and this person's willing to swear to it in front of the courts. But what she wouldn't do is actually put forth what she was backing up her statements with. She never backed it up. She would always say it was forthcoming, and then you would never see it. And I think Rudy Giuliani got swept up into that Sidney Powell thing too, because he started doing the same thing. And the email blasts or the texts that would come out, they were not very well written, and it always lacked anything to support it.
Would that be substance?
It did lack substance.
Yes, that would be kind of like the congressman from Southern California by the name of Adam.
Shifty Shift.
Who did the exact same thing with the Russia collusion.
Who would keep saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and then it never came out.
Yeah, so it obviously happens on both sides. It's just some get more attention and some have more power than others and get away with it.
But let's talk about what you can get away with, or maybe what you can't get away with.
Let's do it.
I'll believe it when I see it, but at this point, there is an IRS whistleblower who is coming out and saying that they have made legally protected disclosures to various government entities, which is to the U.S. Treasury Inspector General for the Tax Administration, the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General, etc. Like, they've made protected disclosures, and they are claiming that the Hunter Biden IRS portion of the scandal, because there's many parts of his scandal, but the IRS portion had so much political play that investigating Hunter Biden for what he did or did not do was all political. And not saying they were going after him because, Republicans wanted to get a Democrat, that those higher up were putting political pressure on IRS agents to not do their job.
Well, it sounds like this happens quite often when you're a person of power and influence. I kept trying to Google or query information all day long today about how long does it normally take before you indict? What are the prosecutorial rules to indict? And I couldn't get a straight answer as it related to the Biden family. And it was interesting that every time I would query something like that and not even mention a Biden name, something about the Bidens would pop up and how it's misinformation, it's Russia collusion, it's all the stuff that I wasn't looking for. I just wanted to know if 5 years was normal to hide stuff, to hide things about an individual, because I guarantee you, not just a Republican or a Democrat, but if it was a common person on the street that did not register as a foreign agent and that were building LLCs to then hide money and shift it around and move it to different family members, when you don't have a clear vision or a clear job as to, like these experts are saying, what you're receiving for those monies, I would say it's time to investigate, charge, and prosecute. But we seem to be affording protection for this individual and the additional family members based on who they are.
So just giving a point of reference. Now, mind you, this isn't IRS, but this is still with the feds, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. There is a case, and I'm not going to name the specific name, but this individual is someone that I know personally and I worked with, but they committed, by the charging documents, they committed immigration fraud. And even though they committed immigration fraud, they were able to hide their identity, get status, get citizenship, and ultimately they became an immigration services officer and worked with me. This individual had their home searched, and I say they because he was married. They had their home searched in 2019, and they obtained evidence about his true identity because he had records in his home as to his true identity. Even though he came over in 2000, he still had some of his original records with him. They did not charge him until April of 2021. 2 years went by from the point that they searched his home until they ended up charging him, indicting him, and bringing him in front of a judge. So this is a regular person who committed immigration fraud and then worked for the federal government, and it still took them 2 years. But I will say something that is noted in this case. They had to go to his original home country in order to get the proof that they needed of his identity. So some of this information wasn't being filtered straight through the United States. They did have to go to a foreign country, and then considerations for where that foreign country is and the current security issues related to that foreign country also hindered the process. But you can't tell me that a person where information is flowing through the government at all times, the government is able to look into our money dealings and see what's coming in from a foreign country and what's going out to a foreign country, and anything over 10K is being reported. He's going to have so many reports on him. You're telling me that you could not track any of that money. The IRS is looking into him because the money reports of what's going in and out of his bank account and how much he's claiming on his tax returns, well, you're not going to claim fake money, fraud money, and how you're hiding it. And his level of lifestyle is in the public eye, so you would be able to see what he's doing is 5 years later, and in some cases more than 5 years after the committed acts, and you still don't have anything on him. And that is conspiracy time. They've let the statute of limitations run out on each of these things that they could charge him with.
That would be correct. And not only that, generally, when a company, corporation, or individual has one suspicious activity report, it's investigated. Mr. Hunter there had over 160 that have been brought to light as of today, spread out over a dozen banks. So they have had the information, just like they've had the information on the big guy and following him over the years and others. They just want to protect their own. There's a small niche group there that once they build this kind of power, they're so protected they all feel they're untouchable. There's a clinical term for this. It's either narcissism or they're borderline sociopaths.
All of the above.
Yes.
So to keep going with some of what's going on with Hunter Biden, it is thought that Merrick Garland lied under oath to Congress about what he knew when he knew it and what role he played in the Hunter Biden scandal. And so now, according to the lawyers, now I haven't personally seen it, but according to the whistleblower's lawyer, they have the receipts. This IRS agent supervisor has the proof of the lie.
Right. See, they're going to end up twisting this and they're going to end up charging the IRS agent with removing documentation from a federal office.
Oh, guaranteed.
Yes.
Even though he's applied for whistleblower status.
Correct.
So you can't blow the whistle if you don't have the info, but yet if you have the info, you're the one in the wrong because you took government property, even though you're trying to show that the government or agents of the government are acting wrongfully. So I'll believe it when I see it, though. You got to show me that you really have it. I'm not going to do like the Sidney Powell thing where you keep saying that you have something and then you don't. So after so many times of Sidney Powell doing that, I quit following her. I do believe that, just as an aside, there are errors in our ways for our voting systems and how we do things, guaranteed. And I'm not saying Dominion's at fault. I did vote on a Dominion system in California on this last election cycle. We had Dominion systems, and guess what? It was erroring.
And ours, when I voted a few hours after you, the system went down 3 times while I was there, not blaming the machines. They're blaming the Wi-Fi, and they're blaming the hard lines, and they're blaming the office downtown that controls all this. But it lends people, or it tends to make you think conspiracy, that there's something going on here.
Right. So that, don't sue me. I'm not saying that they are doing anything wrong. Obviously, a lawsuit was settled and it was thought that they were going to win it, which is why Fox News settled with them. It's just hard when you hear it all, or you're allowed to say it, is probably... Are you allowed to say it is probably something that I wonder with today's freedom of speech issues, not to disparage a company, but hey, they had voting problems. Okay, well, what role did they play? If you say absolutely zero, that no, just because there was problems, nothing went wrong. Okay, now I really don't believe you because I watched problems happen. I watched where I couldn't vote. I watched the machines go down. I watched them have trouble. So you can't tell me that everything's running smoothly or that's non-problematic. So that's not to say that they're running a huge fraud organization or fraud operation, but there is a problem. So we got to meet in the middle and address the real problem.
Correct. And the machines are built by man, so they are not 100% infallible. Machines do fail, electronic and or otherwise. And that brings me to a point about the Sidney Powell person. I work with a bunch of people at work that are really good guys and gals. And they always throw little tidbits, not all of them, but a couple of them, information. Hey, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about that? Well, most of the stuff is from sites that you can't verify. So I'm not going to put ourselves at risk by talking about some things that are probably factually untrue, or that someone has taken the truth and really stretched it like a rubber band to where maybe from 0 to 100, about 2% of it's accurate and the rest is false information. And she may have started off with the best of intentions, and it just went south from there. And then once she got in the limelight and people started patting her on the back, that's when she just went wild with...
She could not stop.
She could not stop or control herself. You know, just like Mr. Zuckerberg, and I hate to call people Mr., especially when they're younger than I am, was heck bent on making sure that one person won the election over the other. That's why he and others, I believe, are the ones that you and I have talked about several times, are the ones that are personally responsible for changing probably hundreds of thousands of votes, especially in places like Arizona and like Wisconsin, Milwaukee, where the vote difference was less than the margin of error. Okay, had information on the laptop and others not been squashed by these 50-some experts that formerly worked
Intel experts.
that their very position is to lie and mislead to get to an end goal, maybe things would have turned out a little bit different.
Well, and Anthony Blinken was on Biden's team when he was running, and it appears that he was the start of getting Intel officials to write the letter that absolved Hunter Biden of the connection that this was his laptop, that it was in fact Russian disinformation. And so it started from someone on Biden's team who's now a high-level official, Secretary of State. He's a cabinet-level official.
This is what we call quid
Pro
quo.
Joe.
You do this for me a couple weeks before the election. If it helps get me in office and sways the election, I will give you a cabinet-level position.
And that's what he got. He went from being on the Biden team to being the Secretary of State. And he had the connections, all of the Intel people having the connections, like Brennan, Panetta, Clapper, etc. They had connections of high-level spooks to write a letter to say Russian disinfo. And we had been hearing about Russian disinformation for the past 6 years. By that point, maybe it was 5 years. By that point, Trump's connection to Russia and the fact that there was Trump-Russia collusion. And I don't think the Trump-Russia collusion was officially dispelled until after Biden was sworn in.
I wonder why when we were meddling in Israel's election, they didn't call it America collusion. Maybe they were over there. They were looking at the intelligence and calling it America collusion because when Mr. Obama was in office and Biden was VP, they were meddling in the elections in Israel to try to keep Netanyahu from winning re-election. Kind of like we did down in Brazil.
Yeah, we're allowed to meddle, but nobody else is allowed to meddle. And we need our bad guy, right? Ooh, Russia, bad.
Yes, Russia is bad.
And if you are in the United States and you make memes about Russia that appear to support Russia, you could find yourself indicted. Did you know that?
Yes, you could go to prison.
Yes, so the DOJ has indicted some U.S. citizens for posting anti-Ukraine memes. And they are a group of black nationalists who happen to be on the left and oppose the war in Ukraine. And they've been called out because the indictment makes it appear that they're a domestic terrorist who are supporting Russia. And the domestic terrorism is that apparently that they are being paid by a foreign government and trying to incite people, trying to get people against Ukraine. And the truth is that, or at least it appears that they were not paid by Russia. They're not paid by a foreign government to say anything. They were just potentially expressing their opinion.
Isn't that amazing how tides have turned? Back in the 60s and early 70s, when all these leftists were anti-war against the Vietnam War, it was okay to protest. It was okay to do what they would call their form of memes back in the day. But now that it's flip-flopped and certain organizations can't have right to free speech and they cannot voice their opinion, then they're bad and they must be arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. This is almost Stalin-esque, if you ask me.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of the government side on it, the government is saying that the 4 U.S. citizens and some Russian nationals were attempting to sow discord and spread pro-Russian propaganda, and that the allegation is the Russian defendants recruited, funded, and directed U.S. political groups to act as unregistered illegal agents of the Russian government. So that's going to be where they believe they have an indictment and can go forward. Or obviously they have the indictment, but where they can go forward with the charges because Russians were paying U.S. citizens to spread disinformation.
There's been a lot of disinformation going on in the last 3 years, and I think they've redefined what misinformation means, because I do believe this is not misinformation. However, how come Hunter Biden has not been charged with being a foreign agent?
Being an unregistered foreign agent?
Correct.
Absolutely. He should be indicted for being an unregistered foreign agent. He should... Using your parents' connections isn't necessarily something that you would indict somebody for. So if you had a business connection and then I ended up utilizing saying, hey, remember you've worked with my dad and you should do business with me, is not necessarily indictable. But if you then turn around and say, oh, you want to meet at the White House or have dinner with the vice president, and he's going to give the thumbs up to something, we start to have a problem.
Do you remember General Flynn?
Yes.
Was he not prosecuted as an unregistered foreign agent?
Yes, he was. He's a high-level official, former official, he's general, and he had connections that he had made through his career and his life after retiring, and that was enough for them to say that he was an unregistered foreign agent. And he was swept up in the Trump-Russia collusion. When they were investigating Trump for colluding with Russia, they had a bunch of individuals that they charged with various charges. But for General Flynn and I think a few others, they just go with 1001, which is to say lying to the feds. And the lying part is interpreted by the feds on whether or not you lied to them.
So it's liars interpreting lying.
Yes.
And that's why they pass legislation. So when they run for office and they tell mistruths, they're protected from lying.
Yes.
Kind of a tangled web they've woven.
And in General Flynn's case, he actually plea bargained. So he did plea bargain. He pled guilty to one felony count of willfully and knowingly making materially false statements and omissions to the FBI. So 1001. That's in violation of 18 U.S. Code 1001. That is the catch-all that they get people on. I believe that's the same thing that Martha Stewart was found guilty of, was 1001. But in his case, he was also required to work with the feds as a part of his plea bargain, and then they did not keep up their end of the plea bargain, and I believe they actually went on to attempt to charge him, even though he was working with the feds as requested.
And I believe in recent times, his attorney has asked to go back to court and reverse these charges because they absolutely wrecked his life.
Yes, and Trump pardoned him, so that was, I think, the easiest way for his situation to end was just to bring a pardon and say, okay, we're done.
And somebody like Shifty Schiff can get away with what he did for multiple years, and he's still in office. He's still a congressman, but he's not being held accountable for his actions.
Yeah, we have a lot of people in Congress who end up not being held accountable for their actions. But us, regular Joe Schmoes. All day long we'd go to jail.
Correct. That's why there is 2 to 3 tiers of justice. There's laws for us and there's laws for them. Even though the scales of justice, if you look at her, are supposed to be equal.
Okay, let's talk about how things are interpreted in certain laws and the way it depends on who's the prosecuting individual, who's deciding to take up the case that can sway how things are done. A few different examples. Let's do a local example. So there was a young lady that was killed in a crash in Fresno County. And the family was from Hanford, and they're questioning why, after a year, there isn't more progress on the case of an individual who blew a stop sign going 76 miles an hour and hit the car holding this gal, Marissa, and her mom. Marissa was killed in the car accident, and there has now been a complaint filed on behalf of the 14-year-old's dad against the driver after she was only charged with a misdemeanor. So driving excessively, blowing a stop sign, and ultimately she was charged with a misdemeanor. What is coming out is that this individual was connected to law enforcement, the driver of the other car.
That's interesting. That was here in Fresno?
It was in Fresno. So the claim is that the district attorney did not do their due diligence intentionally, and then they won't return any of the phone calls of the family. So the due diligence includes why they're not looking into whether the person was on the phone, if they had drugs, alcohol, or anything in their system. And it is being said that she was only charged with a misdemeanor because they didn't do any of the other parts of the investigation that would have led to potentially further charges. Now, this individual is an officer that works for the Department of Corrections in Corcoran, and her spouse is the warden of Pelican Bay State Prison. So it's being said that they're trying to downplay everything that happened, including exactly how fast they were going. And apparently there's nothing in the police reports that actually say how fast the driver was going when she ran the stop sign. They never did a toxicology report. They never checked the cell phone records. They never looked into whether or not she was driving distracted, tired, anything. That they did a bad investigation or a mediocre or non-existent investigation, and a year later, the only charge that they were willing to give was a misdemeanor.
Well, that's interesting because our DA is a bulldog. And I don't mean a bulldog gang member. I mean that she is a bulldog as it relates to going after people and prosecuting them when they've done wrong.
Apparently, the father of the daughter that died also gave a comment that said there was a criminal background check that was run on his wife during this investigation, and she would be the victim of the car accident.
Yeah, and this makes absolutely no sense, and I will dive into this. Matter of fact, I will dive into it in the next day.
Yes, I just thought that's one area of, potentially how things are handled. In another, you have Los Angeles, where in Los Angeles, you have a DA who was looking into ways to not charge gang members for killing a 1-year-old in Crossfire, looking to see if they could do restorative justice so these gang members would not see prison for murder during a gang shootout. So that is another level of justice. Arguably, the gang members are regular schmoes. We're regular schmoes. They're regular schmoes. They don't have anything that, no money backing them up. But the way we're looking at certain crimes now, you have a DA who has elevated a gang member above the murder victim so greatly that the child dies and they don't want any form of justice to occur or the gang member to have any sort of learning lesson of going to jail and then bettering themselves after that.
Right, and it's interesting from the DA side because you have a DA down in SoCal that's Soros-backed, and you have a DA here in Fresno County, who is not. Yet, even though it's maybe somebody with prestige, place, and power, and just commoners, you have a parallel within how the justice system is trying to shield individuals.
Yeah. So just to note, people are trying to recall this DA down in Los Angeles and replace the DA because of the fact that they wanted to allow a gang member to go unpunished for murder. And then LA, let's talk about no good deed goes unpunished. LA also has come out against Arnold Schwarzenegger for patching a pothole.
How dare him? That's just like a homeowner on the beach down in Southern California that painted a set of stairs. I do believe I showed you this video. And the county is upset at him because he didn't pull permits, and he did it without permission, even though it's an area that gets frequented by over 1 million tourists a year. He was tired of the blight he was seeing, and it had been over 3 years since anyone from the county or city there had shown up to take care of these stairs down to the beach.
And it going into disrepair was harmful to people utilizing it.
Correct. And
they could have been injured.
He paid for it out of his own pocket.
So what happened with the local area, the Los Angeles neighborhood of Brentwood, where Arnold Schwarzenegger filled this pothole, the claim was that a trench had been dug for utility work. And so what Schwarzenegger did was fill the trench for utility work, and that he wasn't filling a pothole. So then Arnold Schwarzenegger comes out and says that it is not true. The story is correct that utility work was finished in January. I filled the hole 3 months later, and the city left my fix in place. So this claim, because it made headlines, that's the part where, oh no, we didn't do that. We don't want to look like the bad guys. We don't want to look like we left a hole in the street. So no, you can't just go filling potholes.
Well, don't we see that all over our local town here? They'll do utility work and they'll go to patch the road or the sidewalk, and the patch is worse than the condition it was in before they cut the trench open. I love seeing a little quick sidebar story. People being city workers, county workers, and not the individuals, just the job. They will completely tear a road up. They'll work the ground. They'll compact it. They'll re-asphalt it. Then a utility will come in 6 to 8 weeks later, cut a trench right through the middle of this brand new asphalt, put in a pipe, put in a line, and then cover it back up. And then the patch is terrible. It destroys. It
looks janky.
Yes. And I have talked to city workers and contractors and asked them, okay, you guys are doing this in reverse. Why? And they will tell me it's because they get the funding initially to do the road. They get the funding to do the utilities after the fact. That's why they work in reverse. And if they were to stop and wait for the funding to come for the utility, then the road, they would lose the money for the road for another project.
So speaking of projects or ordinances, Berkeley, California was actually the first in the country to ban natural gas. So there's been a lot of talk about that. It's been in Washington as of late. But in the summer of 2019, there was a ban on the use of natural gas in new buildings, and that was passed in Berkeley. So now there are 99 similar ordinances in place across the country. Berkeley started it and others followed suit, but the vast majority of which require appliances like stoves and heaters to be electric. However, as of mid-April, the Federal Appeals Court threw out many of these bans. And the 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit, color me surprised because it was in the Ninth Circuit, which is liberal.
Very liberal.
Out of San Francisco, said that Berkeley's ban is preempted by a federal law, and therefore it is illegal for Berkeley to have the ban.
So I wonder how many buildings are going to go back and retrofit with gas lines, and they're going to charge the owners of the commercial property and the residential property that now want gas in their homes.
Money, money, money. Always about more money.
Well, it just makes me wonder sometimes where these folks' mindset's at and how come they don't think things through? These are supposed to be uber educated people. They're not the dumb of the dumb or the undertrained or undervalued people. They're people with higher degrees.
Well, that should just show you the ultimate result of going to college and getting these high level degrees.
Well, what it tells me is what we talked about here a few weeks ago. I was 100% correct in saying that these things work in theory in college, but they do not work or play out in practical application, because time and time again, people do things, they have to reverse course and then do exactly what they tell you can't do, or you shouldn't do, or you don't want to do. We can't eliminate natural gas. It's one of the cleanest burning energies there are. We can't eliminate fossil fuels because 6,000 to 10,000 of our products are made from derivatives of crude oil, and there's no replacement in the next 100 years for this stuff.
So something that you brought up previously on the podcast would be the net zero emissions, and I'm not talking about an electric vehicle. I'm talking about a gas-powered vehicle where we make it so efficient that it is not polluting our environment.
And it's absolutely possible if Mr. Elon Musk and his crew
saves the world,
can send a rocket to Mars or to the moon or something to go up and then come back down and land on its own accord, then we can do a zero emission combustion engine.
I would love to see it. Whether it's Elon Musk or some other highly intelligent individual. So let's continue talking about things that work in theory, right? These uber educated individuals come up with their theories, and the leftist way is the only way. We hear all the time that the right-leaning individuals are just terrible, horrible. They only want you to have a hard life. So the left-leaning individuals are going to come in, be the saviors, and their ideas are the only ideas that we should put forth. Whether it's AOC and the Green New Deal, Gavin Newsom and how to deal with the homeless crisis. He came out with this whole pitch before he was running for governor. He had the best ideas on how to end the homeless crisis. So Gavin Newsom has now directed the National Guard and the California Highway Patrol to help combat San Francisco's fentanyl trafficking crisis. So the open-air drug dens that arose out of a lot of their own policies, the leftist policies on our new way forward and how we're going to kumbaya, come together, and everything's going to work like a utopia. There is now an agreement between State of California National Guard, California Highway Patrol to dismantle the fentanyl trafficking and disrupt the supply of the deadly drug in the city by holding the operators of large-scale drug trafficking operations accountable. This is coming from Gavin Newsom's office. Now, what I will say on this piece, how do you give people clean needles, clean access to drugs, way to test your drugs, easy access, places to do it, a nurse to watch you, all of these things that they've given, arm tie-off bans, just wanting to give you good access to clean drugs, and then you want to go after the drug dealers. Why? You told people it's okay to do drugs. You didn't help them get off of drugs.
Because they're starting to infiltrate the wrong parts of town. And once the uber elite start having homeless show up to their homes and start getting into their business affairs, then they're going to make a change. I can fix it. 5 minutes. Okay, let's role play. I'm Gavin Newsom. You're his aunt in D.C.
Hi, I'm Nancy Pelosi.
Hi, Nancy. This is your nephew, Gavin.
Hey, nephew. How's it going?
Well, it's going well for me, but it's not going well for California and our state of affairs as it relates to fentanyl on our border. So would you do me a favor?
What can I do?
Would you walk across the street or down the block and go speak to Mr. President and ask him to close the border?
Sure thing. Absolutely. Anything to help protect California and our great United States.
Problem solved.
But in reality, we have a governor who comes out and says that two truths can coexist at the same time. San Francisco's violent crime rate is below comparably sized cities like Jacksonville, Florida, and Fort Worth, Texas. And there is also more we must do to address public safety concerns, especially the fentanyl crisis. So what he's trying to say is these places in the Republican states are worse than we are, but we still want to do something about the bad stuff.
Yes, he's speaking more mistruths. And as you and I talked about eloquently a few podcasts back, there's folks that are homeless that, why are they there? Drug addiction. So how do you fix drug addiction? You give them free drugs.
Right. So how about we stop the drug suppliers in their tracks by making sure that we've helped people get off drugs, and then there's no one to sell to. How about that?
See, there's big money in drugs. That's one of the reasons that there was a conflict with Afghanistan and Russia. That's why other countries have wanted to go over there to do what? Control the opium trade.
So you look at the claim by Gavin Newsom that San Francisco doesn't have near the crime problem, near the violent crime problem that Fort Worth and Jacksonville, Florida have. One of the things that I learned through a lot of my research and just living through specific situations or having friends, coworkers, etc., who have lived through specific situations, if you don't report the crime, does that mean it doesn't happen? So the crime statistics out of San Francisco are bogus because they don't arrest on certain crimes. And sometimes they don't even ticket. They were watching people tear apart stores, steal, have big theft rings, etc. And they weren't arresting any of those individuals. They were just letting them go. The police wouldn't show up to make a report. I personally know of 2 individuals who were invited into a home, and then another family member came into that home or came downstairs. The specific is I don't recall whether they were already there or came into the home, but then realized that these 2 individuals were there, and they didn't want to allow the 2 individuals to leave. It became a combative situation. And so those 2 individuals decided, we're leaving now. We don't want to stay in the home. The person was getting irate, irrational, etc. So they go to leave, and that other party attempts to stop them. Would not let them leave, held the door shut, locked them in, tried to grab for, and ended up assaulting one of the 2 individuals. Eventually, they got on the phone with the police. The police refused to come. They were eventually able to get out of the house after being held hostage and one of them being assaulted, and the police refused to come still. They went down to the police station to file a report. The police refused to take it. Held hostage, held against their will, let's say not hostage, held against their will, and one of the 2 assaulted, and the San Francisco Police Department refused to come or make a report. You don't have a crime problem if you don't report or take a report or show up when people are claiming to have been assaulted or held against their will.
Which is the exact same thing the mayor of New York, same statement he made last week or so, when he claimed that crime is less in New York than it is in certain parts of Florida and certain parts of Texas. They always try to compare to the red states. Well, if that were the case, then in my simple thinking, then all the people that are vacating California and New York, moving to these states and cities, they're exporting the problem to Texas and to New York, because those particular areas used to be red, but within the red area, they're blue, just like Austin, Texas, and the crime rate there. It's high, and there's a lot of imports from parts of New Orleans and from parts of California.
Yes, and in Austin, they defunded the police, and now the police won't even show up because they can't. They don't have the funding. They don't have the number of police officers. They don't have the availability. They got exactly what they asked for as far as less police, but now there's a bigger crime problem, and the police can't show up when something does happen.
See, and that's just like Asheville, North Carolina. It's a big tourist hotspot, and the crime is getting so bad there. All the folks that wanted to defund the police there are now begging for a role reversal.
It's the same thing that happened in San Francisco with one of the representatives, and she claimed, "Oh, I've been always asking for the police to show up, and they refused to show up for our area." Well, she voted to defund it. She wanted less presence, and when you get less presence, in this particular instance, you got more crime. But one of the suburbs, I think, of Houston, their fix for the crime problem is to plant more trees.
That'll do it.
They say the hotter it is, the more crimes that are committed. So if you have more shade trees, less crimes will be committed. So that's how they are creating solutions. But if you listen to representatives like Hank Johnson, who's a Democrat in Georgia, during a House Judiciary Committee hearing, he claimed that the family members of New York City crime victims are props in a MAGA Broadway production. And this was a hearing for the New York City issue called Victims of Violent Crime in Manhattan. And it was taking aim at Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and what Republicans have been saying that he's pro-crime and anti-victim. So then you have a representative from Georgia basically saying that crime victims' families are MAGA props. They're not real victims. They're not real victim family members. They're just props.
Well, that young mother who was at that committee meeting in New York last week handled both of them, Congressman. And she spoke very eloquently about the death of her son and the stabbing of her husband, and that she's not a prop. And prior to Bragg being elected, the previous DA had his assistant DA set up to prosecute the individuals that murdered his son. And when Bragg took office, conveniently, they get let out or the evidence disappears and they're not prosecuted. So what does that tell you? It tells you that she's not a prop. It tells you that she's a legitimate human being that had love for her son, and that these congressmen are as phony as the day is long.
Absolutely. And if you listen to some of what's been going on as far as the hearings that they hold, on in these different committees, you had journalist Matt Taibbi, who gave testimony regarding his Twitter files release. So now one of the top Democrats wants to hold him for perjury and give him prison time over what she claims is him lying to Congress, basically. And the error was that he gave the wrong acronym, the wrong group, and so she claimed that he misrepresented whether it was a government agency or a private organization on the House Judiciary Select Committee, one of the subcommittees. And he actually came out and said, "Oh, hey, I made a mistake. I said this acronym, and it is this acronym. However, it is like the reporting still stands. I did make an error when I was speaking, and this is how I made the error. Let me correct it. It was an unintentional error. He wasn't trying to go in front of Congress and lie. But here you have now a Democrat who says, let's get you some prison time."
It's interesting that he is a left-leaning Democrat, and he always has reported as such. And soon as he steps outside the box, then they want to squish him with a hammer. The thing that concerns me or bothers me the most is all these representatives we have on both sides of the aisle are failing to look at what a representative republic means. That they're here for us. They're not here to self-serve. They're not here to make things up. They're here to create laws that are good and that protect the populace, because that's the only job they should have. We give them tax money. We ask them to represent us in a good manner so we can go on with our lives and raise our children and on and on.
Instead of going out and selling off their shares of banks just before we're led on to know that failures are going to happen in the banking industry.
Correct.
I mean, working with insider knowledge like Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida, he sold off his shares of Seacoast Banking Corp just a few days before the government was working on controlling the crisis in the banking industry.
Yes, and then you have others that are just commoners that do it, and then they go to prison for it.
Insider trading for Martha Stewart, which was ultimately pled 18 U.S.C. 1001, lying, which is what they want to go after Taibbi for, lying to Congress, 18 U.S.C. 1001.
And a lot of the folks that go speak on their side never get prosecuted. They never get threatened. They just let them speak, even though it's not truthful, and they just move on to the next.
Yeah, not truthful, like JP Morgan Chase having deeper connected ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And apparently a new report has come out that one of the heads of JP Morgan actively worked to make sure Jeffrey Epstein could get access to money even after his whole house of cards came down. And this individual had flown on his jet, been to his locations. So the not deep ties were very deep ties to the banking industry. And why should this matter? Why should it matter to you? Why should it matter to me? How many times have we heard about the banks cutting ties with people for being conservative or being too right-leaning but now we have a bank that actively supported a known pedophile. A big bank. JP Morgan cut ties with right-leaning individuals. If you were not of the correct social climate, you were canceled by banks. PayPal would quit letting you do business. We'd see this all over. But JP Morgan, high-level people, were actively supporting Jeffrey Epstein and his financial dealings.
See, the word on the street is he was a CIA operative, and they were using him to keep close ties on these corporate executives.
Oh, so it didn't matter that he liked little girls.
Yeah, so they allowed him to go after little girls and let all these other people go after little girls, but they had them all reined in and they knew exactly what they were doing.
All of these strategically placed individuals would help the government later, if that is to be believed. So what do you get for being responsible?
Expound on that. Responsible in the
responsible in the financial sense. We're going to go back to banks and finances, but we're going to take a little turn that you maybe opened a credit card or two. You would buy a few things, but you paid off your credit card every month. Or maybe you just made your monthly payment. Perhaps you went into debt on a few things. Your car got a little expensive at one point, so you had to make some repairs. You put it on your credit card. You paid it off over the course of several months. You were a renter. You always paid your rent on time. Sometimes you had to work 2 jobs or cut other little things to make sure you made ends meet. But ultimately, you were a good human. You did everything that you were supposed to do, and you get to a place where you're making enough money, and the bank will loan you enough money that you can go out and buy a house.
See? You just spoke about me so eloquently that I don't have to say a word, because that's exactly how myself and my spouse have pretty much lived our lives for 40 plus years. We borrow, we pay back, we borrow, we pay back, we do everything in a responsible manner. Are we in debt sometimes? Yes. A little over our head? Absolutely. But we never ask anyone for help. We always work through it. We make our payments on time, and we are what we consider good, productive members of society.
So I understand that there are going to be people out there that end up in a situation where their credit gets harmed through life circumstances. For instance, perhaps you end up in a bunch of medical debt for a very unforeseen circumstance, and then ultimately you decide that you declare bankruptcy so you can have a fresh start that is allowed by our laws and our society, and it may take you 7-ish years to build your credit back up from that point. But you can do it. You can still work to build up good credit. And then there are people who that's their cycle. They intentionally run themselves into a bunch of debt because they know they're going to declare bankruptcy on it. And then they'll wait a few years. They get to get credit cards again, and then they can get in more debt. And their plan is to not pay their bills. intentional. And then there's others who are somewhere in between. But now the Biden administration is forcing a rule change where people who have worked diligently to have a good credit score so they can buy a home now need to subsidize the loans for high-risk borrowers. And they're high risk for a reason. It is believed that they will not pay their payment, that they may be taking out more than they can chew, or they may be acting irresponsible with their money. And so this move is that Joe Biden is now requiring a certain portion of a mortgage loan to help people with low credit scores, people with smaller down payments, and then it will impose the fee on people with high credit scores, people with high down payments. So it's penalizing borrowers with larger down payments and credit scores, good credit scores. So that's your punishment. If you do well and you do what you're supposed to do, you commit to societal norms and you make your payments and you didn't, end up in debt, like medical debt that you just could not get a hold of, your punishment is you have to pay everybody else's payment too. You have to subsidize everybody else.
And that's what happens when you let these little socialists work their way up through the political ranks and get into high positions of power. They do exactly what they're doing because they think they know better and they think that everybody needs to help everybody else. And I like your mindset and your thinking. There's times when people have medical issues. I know somebody close at work that just passed away in the last few days. And now I was thinking today that his spouse and kids are going to struggle, and they may have had great credit scores and they own a home, and that could all come crashing down just by the sheer number of medical bills somebody amasses when they're dying of cancer, because the insurance policies don't cover enough to help them out. There's usually a lot of incurred cost on the back end. And that's a person that is a candidate to be helped. That's what our system of helping the needy is supposed to be for, not for somebody who has recidivism and they continue to fall into this thing where they're charging and not paying it, filing bankruptcy multiple times throughout their lifetime. But this is just one of many things that this guy feels he needs to do to punish achievers, when the achiever or underachiever that needs to be punished is in his own family. How about we take some of the millions that he's utilized and taken from other countries off of his dad's coattails, and let's start a little fund and let's give that to people that need assistance.
Let's do it with all their relatives. He's not the only one. He's just one of the biggest ones in the limelight right now.
Well, there's 12 of them known now, a potential 3 to 6 more of all ages, male, female, cousins, uncles, aunts, dad, who obviously is the big guy. And they had to do that through their LLCs, or he did it so him and his business partners could try to spread the money out to not get caught. Well, it's time to pay the piper. You've been caught, and hopefully he won't get away with this. He'll be made an example of. And his dad and mom should be embarrassed, because if he really does have the drug issues that he potentially continues to have, they are just enabling this young man by continuing to let him get away with what he's getting away with. And that's my soapbox on that young man.
Yeah, while the rest of us are just attempting to be middle class. I want to be rich. I want to be a part of the wealthy elitist. Maybe I don't want to be the elitist side, but definitely would not turn down $1 billion. But if you're looking at 2023 and you look at what it takes to be middle class in some of these cities, in some of these large cities, it's very difficult now. It's very difficult to be middle class based on you're considered middle class in Fremont, California, if you make $310,000 because of the cost of living in these cities. $310,000 in your middle class. Fremont, California. San Jose, California, $252,000. You still fall into middle class. Arlington, Virginia, $251,000. San Francisco, $243,000. Seattle, Washington, $221,000. Irvine, California, $211,000. Now, I lived in a city just outside of Irvine. Now I know why us being married at the time, having children, making good money, and I felt broke. $2,500 in childcare and $2,500 in rent, and now rent's gone up even more than that. $5,000 a month just for two basic needs to be covered. And now we want to punish those same people. If you have a good credit score, you're going to have a hefty down payment if you live in these big cities because the home prices are so high. So what looks like a big down payment to someone is barely scraping it for another, and they're going to have to pay for other people to have their down payments, to have their mortgages.
Wasn't it amazing when you try to look at the sum total of the parts and say, okay, it's a percentage there, $40 to $60 a month over the course of a 30-year note. We have potential for $1 trillion in reparations nationwide. We have some cities that are going to start giving away free money to people that are not even going to have to work. They're going to get $800 to $1,200 a month. A sustainable wage. Well, if you just repeat again what you just said about those dollars, even that sustainable wage is not sustainable within the counties that are going to give that money away. And that's what it is. It's giving away money.
What is it? Robbing Peter to pay Paul type of situation. And if we want to say here in America, we will take care of our own and we're going to lift each other up, then why do we have situations like out of Michigan where they are approving Chinese-backed companies? So in Michigan, a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, lawmakers led by Democrat State Senator Sarah Anthony gave final approval for $175 million in taxpayer funding to go to a Chinese-based firm to build electric vehicles or electric vehicle battery plants, instead of working to have a U.S.-based company paying $175 million for a U.S. company, a U.S.-founded and based company to do these things. We are giving more money to China. We are funding them. Let's take care of our own a little bit.
Yes, and that's why there's a flood of solar panels right now because of the green energy bills and all the money going to China to build solar panels to then send back to America to sell to us. And that's one of the very things that the previous president was trying to get away from in bringing manufacturing back, and he was castigated for it. He was trying to do right by America and American citizenry, and he could do no right.
No, because apparently Buy American, Hire American was just way too crazy people talk for the United States. You can't just fund companies in the United States. You got to feed the foreigners. And I don't mean literally feed the foreigners. I mean pay China to exist in the United States.
Well, it's also interesting, yes, with China, how many hundreds of thousands of acres they have come in and bought across America. And there used to be a law, and I can't quote the exact law to you without looking it up, but there was a law that this was reportable. When you bought over X amount of acres as a foreign government or a foreigner or a foreign corporation, you had to report that to the federal government. And apparently a lot of this went unreported, unnoticed. And it's kind of coincidental that a lot of the property that was purchased was next to military bases.
We shouldn't be surprised that they would, well, they want to track their weather balloons or their little balloons that can't possibly be taking any photos or signal intelligence or anything like that over the United States. You know, Biden would not allow a balloon to go across the United States and gather intelligence with a foreign country. I mean, and it's not helping them out to buy land near a military base either.
Well, why do we need to do that when guys like Swalwell are just giving it to them, free gratis? Oh, wait a minute. There was a quid pro quo there.
So segueing into one of the hills that I will die on, in Wisconsin, there was a situation where several freshman girls had their freshman PE class, and then they went into the shower facilities in the girls' locker room to shower. And while they were in there, a transgender woman who was not in the freshman PE class showered with the girls. Now, this transgender woman is an 18-year-old student with full male anatomy identifying as female, completely undressed and showered next to these young girls. While I understand that 18-year-olds and 14-year-olds are on the same high school campus, I was 13 as a freshman in high school, so a 13-year-old was on campus with an 18-year-old, and there are girls' locker rooms and boys' locker rooms. There is just something wrong with society when a male says, I'm a female having full male anatomy, and the young girls, or even if it was an 18-year-old group of girls, are forced to shower with a naked man. In order to be, if you're doing PE, do you want to go to your next class filthy? That can be very unhealthy. If you have chemicals on you for swim class, that would be very unhealthy to continue to leave the chemicals on you. But we are forcing girls to give up space for boys or men, and somehow members of society have found that acceptable, and it's a hill I will die on because that is unacceptable anytime.
So there's only certain members of society that are finding that acceptable, and it's obvious that there was a House vote within the last few days. It was the Ladies Sports Protection Act, I believe is what it was called, or that's close to it, and it was approved yay 100% Republican votes, nay 100% Democrat, which makes no sense to me. Either the left side is really good at making people toe the line, or they just don't grasp the concept of what is going on here in society right now. Because I will die on that hill with you as well. They're taking women, ladies, children back 100 years. I've said it a million times. I don't get the whole thing. I don't understand it, the biological side of it. What I do understand is if you're still sporting the male components, you do not belong in a girl's locker room, period. When they have that transition, they start taking their meds that they're required to take so they can work through this thing. That is something different as far as potentially going into a locker room when you're a female, when you don't have a male component. However, to me, that still does not allow them, in my opinion, to actively contribute or be in sports with the females because they're still bigger, they're still stronger, they're still faster.
Lung capacity, your muscle skeletal structure, you have many differences.
100%.
And in New Zealand, he's a former title holder, I believe in 2010, but one of the world's strongest men is angling to compete in the women's division to protest against men who have been competing in the women's division and just taking over all levels of women's sports. So a male powerlifting coach self-identified as a woman and broke a woman's bench press record in protest of gender self-identification in sports. And now you have others who are coming out in support of women, showing that men are different, that they are stronger and faster. If you look at, your top fastest men in the world, there are going to be a lot of men before you get to the fastest female. That is just a fact of life. But now, regardless of hormone treatment, regardless of being given biological male estrogen, all of this stuff, men just say, I'm a woman, and you get to compete. A world's strongest man. Do you think that there's a woman who can beat a world's strongest man record title holder?
Not a single one. So I said the whole thing is kind of confusing.
It is confusing, and there definitely does. It's not just black and white. There is gray area, and for me, the gray area is having a separate category. if women competing in women's sports for, say, the Olympic level individuals have to give a blood test to show that their testosterone isn't too high, if someone suspects that they're doping, and you have to give blood to show that your testosterone isn't up to such a level or even naturally high for some individuals, then why is it a man who says they're a woman who's also taking drugs to help tamp down some of the testosterone and increased estrogen can have a higher level of testosterone than biological females are allowed to have and compete? There's got to be a separate category. So for me, it is male, female, transgender female.
Yeah, see, I like your idea. So let's let them go ahead and compete with the women. But if they win, then the first woman across the finish line is first. And then there's an asterisk next to their name saying they competed. They won this event. However,
I don't even think they should be allowed to compete in the same, not in the same sport. So if you are a runner and you're a transgender woman, as a runner, you have your own category. You can compete against other transgender women.
Like it, especially if the percentages are growing as they say they are.
It seems like the percentages are growing. So then there would be a competitive avenue for each group of people.
Great idea.
Yeah.
I'll buy that as well.
So in another turn of world events, the Sudan conflict is increasing, and they have evacuated the U.S. diplomats from Sudan.
They are falling into a civil war.
There were some reports of Americans who have not been able to get out and are attempting to get the U.S. government to help and assist in getting them out, but they were able to get out the American diplomats and their family members as the rival faction fighting has intensified.
Yeah, of course, and hopefully they don't ask actually Biden for help. They actually go to private contractors.
Well, that's who got people in Afghanistan out. Yes, it wasn't Biden.
Right. That's why I bring that up, because of that debacle there in Afghanistan. You want private contractors and former special operators to go in there and help get those folks out and get them home.
Yeah, right now the State Department has acknowledged that some records show as many as 16,000 U.S. citizens may be in Sudan. And then other foreign nationals began evacuating from the seaport in Sudan, the Red Sea port, this past week, I should say. And that urban warfare has made exiting the nation increasingly difficult. And so some people are stranded. And we're hoping that the United States does better with Sudan than they did with Afghanistan.
Well, isn't it interesting that countries that appear to be broke can't get out of their own way, yet they have war fighters that can pummel each other and prevent large countries like ours and England and others from removing their people in a timely manner? It amazes me.
Well, if you look at Yemen, Iran, among other countries, would like to control the seaport area that Yemen holds. So they send money and fighters down to Yemen to try and help control the country so they get what they want out of it. And then you have other countries like the United States and others who come in and say, well, we don't want Iran to control it, so we'll help support the opposing side. So a lot of times what happens is other countries really are playing a bigger role. Sometimes we know about it publicly and sometimes we don't, on who's really funding whom. So if a country wants a certain side to win, they may be funding those individuals.
So are there any lithium mines in the Sudan?
So let's see. One report, Mining Review Africa, speaking to Mining Review Africa, the country's Minister of Mines, the Honorable Martin Abucha, has laid out an array of South Sudan's mineral offerings that range from clean green tech materials such as cobalt, lithium, nickel, gold, rare earth, and industrial minerals such as limestone, sand, and silica. Looks like there would be some gold, iron ore, base materials, etc. In different locations. It just depends on where the line is.
So it also appears that a few years ago, like around 1990, the Bank of Sudan announced its intention to Islamize the country's banking system.
Well, now, powers that be control all.
Yes, some countries, they need to go Control-Alt-Delete.
100%.
You know, I was thinking today, that's dangerous when I think, because smoke comes out of my ears. Housing markets. So who does the housing market benefit? Does it benefit the lenders? Does it benefit the homeowners? Does it benefit the federal government, or all the above?
I would say all of the above, depending on the situation. Bad money lending, allowing people to get into loans they can't possibly afford, which is what we saw in 2008 and before. Well, really before, 2007 and before, where we were, as a country, being nice and they were giving loans that were terrible loans. It ultimately harmed the individuals, but having your own piece of dirt, having your own little luxury of being away from other people, meaning not in an apartment complex, even if it's a condo that you own, you own a little piece of something. I would say that you're benefited, but a lot of times it's the government, they get taxes. And these big lenders, the way they move money around and they move resources around and what they own altogether, I would say really big benefiters are the government and these big corps.
Okay, so then let's start with the banks. So we turn these loans or notes into simple interest notes. Okay, that would drive down what the homeowner has to pay for the home and an interest. One.
Yes.
Number two, the government, local, state, and federal. We get rid of these tax assessors that like to go value a home way higher than it should be valued. How about we take away that valuation? Say you spend, let's take $100,000, easy number. Buy a home, $100,000, simple interest, no tax assessment. You come with one number, pick a number, 2% over the life of the loan. Can go no higher. You cannot sell your home for profit. What you buy your home for is what you buy your home for. Would that make it affordable for most Americans?
I think that there would be people who still couldn't do it because they do not manage money very well. You see it and you look and you want to buy the really expensive car, going out and buying the Infinities that you can't afford or the Audis you can't afford when you're already living in a certain situation where you're not a homeowner. I think that there will be situations where it won't make it affordable for everyone because there are going to be people who are not financially savvy or spend it well. Would it help most people? I think so.
Which is
the majority.
Which is the human condition. Yes. So you're way smarter than I am. I'm going to be the teacher. You're going to be the student. I got a homework assignment for you.
What's my homework assignment?
I want you to ask one of these artificial intelligence programs how to fix homelessness. See what answer you get.
Okay, I'll put that on my list of homework assignments.
And then I am going to propose what I just brought up to you about home ownership and knocking down the interest and knocking down the taxes to see what answer I get.
Okay, sounds good.
Just curious if these artificial intelligence are programmed and built by super smart people. Let's see what the super smart answer is.
So one of the things I was just thinking as you were asking or talking about homes and maybe having a simple interest rate of XYZ can never go any higher. What if just like buying other property, the tax was the tax at the time of the purchase and you can't tax it again?
Absolutely.
Instead of these annual taxes.
Absolutely. That's where we need to take these assessors out, and somehow we need to stop allowing these people, and I call these people these geniuses that are coming up with these taxes, to continue to come up with models and figure out ways to part us from our money. You know, we go to work, we work very hard, just like you said 15 minutes ago. We toe the line, we do everything that's asked of us, and they are incrementally taking all of our cash flow. You know, you have death taxes, you have property taxes, you have auto taxes, you have taxes on your phones, you have taxes on your hot food purchases, you have taxes on your hotel stay, you have taxes. Well, I don't think the original intent of taxes in a representative republic was to get to the point where we're at now. And it has made half of the country or more ineligible to afford anything. I was at a grocery store with my spouse yesterday, and I watched some folks in front of me paying for their groceries, and it was like $277, and the basket they had enough stuff in it to fill up maybe one bag and a half. And they were just, you could see the look in their face. It's like, how are we going to afford this? They've broken people. They've broken this society. And we've got a man that's going to announce his run for re-election when he doesn't even know what he's eating for dinner tonight. We got a problem.
We do have a problem. We have a problem with Biden. They keep trying to sell us on the idea that he's this young, hip, spry guy who's running the country and doing such a superb job. We should reelect him. And he's barely there. And he gets kudos for showing up to an event at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm all for sleeping in. I understand if you're a night owl, but we don't see him late at night giving all it. They said he's a night owl, so why didn't we see him the night before doing an 11 p.m. interview because he's a night owl and that's when he functions the best? No, we don't see that. He goes to bed early. He gets up late. He is not running the country. He's having all of these people behind the scenes and probably the deep state run the country. And we're being lied to say that he's the one that's actually doing it.
And the latest poll by American adults of voting age, 72 to 78% do not want him to run again. They're probably scared of number 2.
Yeah, Kamala Harris couldn't do it on her own. This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor Duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.